My name is Sandra Miller, 54 years old. After 3 decades as a police officer, my instincts never left me. That night at exactly 2 a.m, frantic knocking jolted me awake. I opened my door to find my daughter Elaine collapsed on my porch, her face bruised beyond recognition. Through broken sobs, she whispered, "Mom, James beat me. He has a mistress." Something inside me hardened. Without a word, I helped her inside, then quietly slipped on my old uniform. I made one phone call that would change everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from. If this resonates with you already, please hit that subscribe button and stay with me. I dedicated my life to upholding justice and protecting the vulnerable. For 30 years, I wore the badge with pride, responding to countless domestic violence calls, never imagining my own daughter would someday become one of those statistics. I retired just 2 years ago, taking a part-time security job at the local community college. Nothing too demanding, just enough to keep me busy and supplement my pension. Elaine and I have always been especially close. Her father walked out when she was 10, leaving me to raise her alone. Those years shaped us both. I worked hard to provide stability, often taking double shifts while juggling her school activities. Despite the challenges, I watched my beautiful daughter grow into a strong, intelligent woman. She excelled in school, earned a business degree, and landed a great job at a marketing firm. I couldn't have been prouder. Then 3 years ago, Elaine met James Donovan at a charity fundraiser for the police department. She called me that very night, excited about this charming businessman who had swept her off her feet. James was 32, owned a successful real estate development company, and had the kind of charisma that commanded attention. I still remember how animated Elaine was describing their first date. He had taken her to the most exclusive restaurant in town, remembered every detail she shared about herself, and seemed genuinely interested in her career ambitions. When I finally met him a few weeks later, I understood the attraction. James was tall, well-dressed, and spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. He was respectful toward me, asking thoughtful questions about my career, and even offering to contribute to the police retirement fund. I was impressed and relieved to see my daughter with someone who seemed to value her so much. Their whirlwind romance progressed quickly. Within 6 months, James had proposed with a diamond ring that must have cost more than my annual salary. The wedding was an extravagant affair held at one of James's hotel properties overlooking the city. 200 guests, a 5-course meal, and Elaine looking radiant in a designer gown. I remember feeling a twinge of concern at how James seemed to make all the decisions about the wedding, but I dismissed it. After all, he was paying for everything, and Elaine appeared delighted with the arrangements. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I missed or chose to ignore. The way James would answer questions directed at Elaine, how he would place his hand on the small of her back, not as a loving gesture, but as a means of steering her. The slightly controlling comments disguised as jokes about her clothing or food choices. But they seemed happy, and who was I to judge a relationship based on my own failed marriage? For the first year, things seemed perfect on the surface. They bought a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood. Elaine reduced her hours at work because James said he wanted her to have more time for herself and their future family. They took luxurious vacations, posting perfect photos on social media that showed a couple living a dream life. But about 6 months ago, I noticed subtle changes in my daughter. Our weekly lunch dates became less frequent. She would cancel at the last minute, offering vague excuses about not feeling well or being too busy. When we did meet, her usual vibrancy seemed diminished. She checked her phone constantly, texting back immediately, as if afraid of missing a message. The last time I saw her before that terrible night 3 weeks earlier, I noticed she was wearing more makeup than usual. There was a moment when she reached for her water glass and her sleeve pulled back, revealing what looked like finger-shaped bruises on her wrist. When I asked about it, she quickly pulled her sleeve down and laughed it off, saying she had accidentally bumped into a door at work. The explanation didn't match the injury, but when I pressed further, she changed the subject. I considered confronting her directly about my suspicions, but hesitated. Elaine was an adult, and I had spent years teaching her independence. I feared pushing too hard would only drive her away. Instead, I gave her my support and kept the lines of communication open, hoping she would come to me when she was ready. I had seen too many domestic violence victims during my career who were isolated from family and friends. I was determined not to let that happen to my daughter. In the weeks before that night, I settled into a quiet retirement routine. Mornings at the gym, afternoons at my security job, evenings watching true crime shows that kept my investigative mind engaged. I called Elaine regularly, leaving cheerful voicemails when she didn't answer. I even drove by their house once, noting James's car in the driveway, but getting no response when I knocked. I told myself she was probably napping or out back, ignoring the knot forming in my stomach. I never imagined how drastically our lives would change when next I saw my daughter. Nothing in my 30 years of police work fully prepared me for seeing my own flesh and blood victimized in such a brutal way. That fateful night had begun like any other. I had worked the afternoon security shift at the college, come home to a simple dinner, and settled in to watch a documentary about cold cases. Around midnight, I switched off the TV and went through my nightly routine, checking the locks, setting the coffee maker for morning, and taking my blood pressure medication. I had just drifted off to sleep when the frantic pounding at my front door jerked me awake. My first thought was that it was probably teenagers playing pranks. It had happened before in our neighborhood, but something about the desperate rhythm of the knocking sent me reaching for the baseball bat I keep beside my bed. Old habits die hard when you spend decades in law enforcement. I crept down the stairs, flipped on the porch light, and peered through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. A hunched figure with long hair obscuring their face leaned heavily against my doorframe. It took me several seconds to recognize my own daughter. I flung the door open and caught Elaine as she stumbled forward. The porch light illuminated injuries that turned my stomach. Her right eye was swollen shut, an angry purple bruise spreading across her cheekbone. Her lip was split and crusted with dried blood. She clutched her ribs with one arm, the other hanging limply at her side. "Elaine, my God, what happened?" I cried, though I already knew the answer. I half carried, half dragged her to my living room couch. Her breathing was shallow and labored, suggesting possible rib injuries. My police training kicked in as I quickly assessed her condition. Facial contusions, possible concussion, suspected fractured ribs, and defensive wounds on her forearms. I had documented similar injuries on countless domestic violence victims, but seeing them on my daughter sent a rage through me unlike anything I had ever experienced. I grabbed my first aid kit and began cleaning her wounds gently, wiping the blood from her face with antiseptic wipes. Elaine winced, but remained silent, her eyes downcast and vacant. I recognized the look. Shock mixed with shame. I had seen it too many times to count. "Elaine, sweetheart," I said softly, using the tone I had developed for traumatized victims. "I need to know if you need hospital attention. Are you having trouble breathing? Any dizziness or blurred vision?" She shook her head slightly, then winced at the movement. "No hospital," she whispered. "Please, Mom, no hospital." I knew why she was refusing. Hospital meant police reports questions and a paper trail. I didn't push it yet, focusing instead on her immediate physical comfort. I gave her some over the counter. Pain relievers wrapped an ice pack in a towel for her face and helped her into a clean t-shirt of mine. For nearly 30 minutes, she sat in silence while I tended to her. Finally, when the shock began to wear off, the dam broke. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to speak between sobs. "It was the texts," she finally managed. "I found messages on his phone, from Bethany, his assistant." She drew a shuddering breath. "They've been sleeping together for months, in our bed when I'm visiting you." My heart sank. The betrayal on top of the violence was almost too much to bear. I took her hand gently, encouraging her to continue at her own pace. "I confronted him tonight after he came home late. He denied it at first, said I was crazy, but I had seen the messages, the pictures she sent him." Elaine's voice hardened momentarily. "When I threatened to call her husband, he just snapped." She described how James had flown into a rage, first verbally berating her, calling her worthless and paranoid. Then came the first slap, shocking her into silence. When she tried to leave the room, he grabbed her by the hair and threw her against the wall. The beating continued until she crumpled to the floor, covering her head as he kicked her repeatedly in the ribs and back. "He stopped suddenly, like he realized what he was doing," Elaine whispered. "He went to the bathroom to splash water on his face. Said he needed air, that I had driven him to this. Then he stormed out and drove away. I knew I had maybe 20 minutes before he came back. I grabbed my purse and keys and just drove. I didn't even think about where I was going until I was turning onto your street." As she spoke, a battle raged within me. The mother in me wanted to hunt James down and make him suffer for every bruise on my daughter's body. But the police officer in me knew that vigilante justice would only make things worse. Elaine needed protection support and a path to justice through legal channels. I stood up, my decision made. I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out the garment bag containing my dress uniform. I hadn't worn it since my retirement ceremony, but it remained perfectly pressed. I put it on slowly, methodically, fastening each button. The familiar weight of the uniform centered me, reminded me of my oath to protect and serve. It wasn't just cloth, but a symbol of the justice system I believed in, despite its flaws. With Elaine watching silently from the doorway, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Marcus, it's Sandra. I need your help. It's Elaine." There was a pause as my former partner and still active lieutenant responded. "Yes, domestic. Her husband. It's bad, Marcus. I need this done right." Another pause. "Yes, I'm sure. She's ready to press charges. Can you come now?" Relief washed over me at his response. "Thank you. We'll be waiting." I turned to Elaine, whose eyes had widened at my transformation and phone call. "Help is coming, sweetheart, and this time James won't be able to charm his way out of the consequences." While waiting for Marcus to arrive, I focused on documenting Elaine's injuries. As much as it pained me, I knew the importance of photographic evidence in domestic violence cases. Too many times I had seen abusers walk free because injuries had healed before trial or because documentation was inadequate. "I need to take pictures," I explained gently. "I know it's difficult, but these photographs could make all the difference in court." Elaine hesitated, then nodded, her jaw set in determination, despite her swollen face. I retrieved my digital camera, carefully photographing each bruise, cut, and scrape from multiple angles, including a ruler in some shots to show scale. I made sure to capture the finger-shaped bruises on her arms, the distinct boot print visible on her lower back, and the clump of hair that had been torn from her scalp. As I worked, I could see Elaine's reluctance growing. Her body tensed with each click of the camera. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom," she whispered. "Go to court. Tell strangers what happened. What if no one believes me? What if he gets away with it?" I set the camera down and sat beside her, careful not to jostle her injured ribs. "I was on the force for 30 years, Elaine. I've seen hundreds of domestic violence cases. The ones that haunt me aren't the ones where we tried and failed. They're the ones where victims never got the chance to seek justice." I told her about Marianne, a young mother I had encountered early in my career. I had responded to a neighbour's call about shouting. Marianne had bruises, but refused to press charges against her husband. I gave her my card, begged her to call me if things escalated. 3 weeks later, she was dead beaten to death while her children were at school. I also saw women who fought back through the system and won, I continued. Women who thought they were trapped but found freedom and safety. It's not easy. I won't pretend it is, but you don't have to do it alone. Elaine was quiet for a long moment. This isn't the first time, she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. He's hit me before. Not this bad, but slaps, shoves. He always apologized, said it would never happen again. Brought expensive gifts. I believed him. I thought I could fix things, make him happy. The confession didn't surprise me, but it still felt like a physical blow. The cycle of abuse was so predictable that we had taught it in police academy training, yet so many victims believed their situation was unique, that their love was strong enough to break the pattern. It will happen again, I said firmly, and it will get worse. You know that now, don't you? She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. What do I do now? First, we get a restraining order. Then, when you're feeling stronger, we file criminal charges. I've already contacted Marcus, who's bringing the paperwork. And tomorrow I'll connect you with a women's shelter advocate who can help with resources and support groups. I explained what filing a police report would involve, the questions she would be asked, the process of pressing charges. I wanted her prepared for every step. Knowledge was power, especially for someone whose power had been stripped away by an abuser. What about our house, my clothes, my things? Elaine asked. We'll arrange for a police escort to retrieve your essentials. As for the house, that's a question for a divorce attorney, which we'll find tomorrow. As we talked, I was also making mental notes and plans. I knew James would not take this lying down. Men like him, accustomed to control and immune to consequences, often escalated when their victims tried to escape. We would need to be prepared for harassment threats and legal maneuvering. I called a women's crisis center I had worked with during my police days, explaining the situation and arranging emergency counseling and safe housing options. The director, an old friend, promised to fast-track Elaine's case and have resources ready by morning. Just as I finished that call, Marcus arrived at my door. Marcus Jefferson had been my partner for 15 years before becoming a lieutenant. At 58, he was nearing retirement himself, but his reputation in the department for handling domestic violence cases with sensitivity and thoroughness was unmatched. He entered quietly, dressed in civilian clothes, but carrying his badge and official paperwork. His expression softened when he saw Elaine, but I noticed the momentary flash of anger in his eyes before his professional demeanor took over. Elaine, he said gently, I'm very sorry this happened to you. Your mother and I are going to make sure you get the protection and justice you deserve. He sat at my dining room table, methodically going through the restraining order application, helping Elaine articulate the abuse in legally precise terms. I saw her confidence growing slightly with each question she answered, each form she signed. What if he comes here looking for me? Elaine asked suddenly, fear etching her features. Marcus and I exchanged glances. It was a legitimate concern, one I had been considering since she arrived. We'll have patrols drive by regularly, Marcus assured her. And I've already put an alert on your address in our system. Any call from this location gets immediate priority response. And sir, I added, reaching into a drawer and pulling out my service weapon. I am still licensed to carry. If James shows up here, he'll find more than he bargained for. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. He knew me well enough to understand I wasn't making idle threats. I would never shoot someone without justification, but I would absolutely use every legal means to protect my daughter. As we finished the paperwork, I saw Elaine's eyelids drooping from exhaustion and medication. I helped her to my spare bedroom, tucked her in like I used to when she was small, and whispered assurances that she was safe now. She fell asleep clutching my hand, her breathing finally even and relaxed. Back in the living room, Marcus and I spoke in low tones about next steps. He would file the restraining order first thing in the morning and assign a detective he trusted to the case. "Sandra," he said seriously, "you know you need to let us handle this officially. I understand your instincts, but if you interfere with the investigation—" "I know the rules, Marcus," I replied. "I just need to know you won't let this get brushed aside or plea bargained away to nothing." He nodded grimly. "Not on my watch. But be prepared. Men like James Donovan have resources connections. This won't be easy." After Marcus left, I checked on Elaine once more, then settled into an armchair facing the front door, my service weapon on the side table beside me. I wouldn't be sleeping that night. My instincts told me James would come looking for his wife, and I intended to be ready when he did. The confrontation came sooner than expected. At 4:30 a.m., barely 2 hours after Marcus had left, headlights swept across my living room as a car pulled into my driveway. I recognized the low purr of James's luxury sedan. I checked on Elaine, who was still sleeping deeply, thanks to the pain medication, then positioned myself in the entryway, one hand on my weapon, the other on my phone, with 911 pre-dialed. The pounding on my door was immediate and aggressive. "Elaine, I know you're in there. Open the door right now." James's voice was slurred but forceful. He had clearly been drinking since fleeing their home. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and opened the door just enough to see him while blocking entry. His expensive shirt was rumpled, his normally perfectly styled hair disheveled. He reeked of alcohol, and his eyes were wild. "James," I said calmly, my police voice firmly in place. "Elaine is resting. She's been injured and needs medical attention." His face underwent a remarkable transformation, anger quickly masked by concern. This chameleon-like ability to shift personas was typical of abusers I had encountered. "Sandra, thank God," he said, his voice dripping with false worry. "I've been so concerned. Elaine and I had a misunderstanding, and she left upset. I've been driving around looking everywhere for her." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, keeping my tone neutral. "The kind of misunderstanding that results in a black eye, split lip, and possible fractured ribs." James's facade slipped for just a moment before he recovered. "She fell. We had an argument. She was upset and not watching where she was going. She tripped down the stairs. I tried to help her, but she was hysterical, wouldn't let me take her to the hospital." It was the typical abuser's explanation, one I had heard countless times throughout my career. I remained expressionless, giving nothing away. "I need to see her," James insisted, attempting to look past me into the house. "She's my wife. I have a right to make sure she's okay. Your rights regarding Elaine have been temporarily suspended." I informed him, my hand still on my weapon, though it remained holstered. "A protective order is being processed as we speak." James's mask dropped completely, then his face contorting with rage. "You meddling bitch," he snarled. "You've never liked me, always trying to turn Elaine against me. She's my wife, my property. You have no right to interfere in our marriage." "Property?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's an interesting choice of words, James." He realized his mistake and tried to backpedal, but the damage was done. "You know what I mean. This is between Elaine and me. You're making this into something it's not." "The law is quite clear about what this is," I replied steadily. "Aggravated domestic assault, battery, potentially attempted murder depending on the medical assessment of her injuries. Now I suggest you leave before you add breaking a restraining order to those charges." James's face flushed with anger. "There is no restraining order yet, and you can't keep me from my wife." He suddenly lunged forward, attempting to force his way past me into the house. I was prepared for this. Despite being retired and giving up some of my physical edge, I still maintained the defensive training that had been ingrained in me through decades of police work. I sidestepped his charge while simultaneously using his momentum against him, sending him stumbling backward onto the porch. James recovered quickly, his eyes now dangerous. He took a step toward me again, hands balling into fists. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he threatened. "I have friends in this town, important friends. One phone call and your precious pension could disappear. Elaine will come home where she belongs, and you'll stay out of our business if you know what's good for you." As he spoke, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A police cruiser had silently pulled up its lights off. The driver's side door opened, and Marcus stepped out now in full uniform. James was too focused on me to notice. "Are you threatening a retired police officer, Mr. Donovan?" I asked calmly. "Would you like to clarify that statement for the record?" James scoffed. "Record? What are you talking about, you crazy old woman?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, which had been recording the entire conversation. James's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with fury. He lunged again, this time directly for my phone. "I believe that's enough." Marcus's authoritative voice cut through the night air. He stepped into the porch light, his badge gleaming. "James Donovan. I'm Lieutenant Jefferson. Turn around and put your hands on your head, please." James froze, suddenly aware he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This is ridiculous," he protested, though his voice had lost its confidence. "I came here looking for my wife who left home upset. These people are keeping her from me." "Sir, I'm not going to ask again," Marcus said firmly. "Hands on your head." For a moment I thought James might resist, might try to run, or even fight. But self-preservation won out. His shoulders slumped slightly as he complied with Marcus's order. As Marcus handcuffed him, reciting his rights with practiced precision, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that James was being taken into custody. Satisfaction that his true nature had been exposed. But also deep sadness for Elaine, for the pain she had endured, and the difficult road ahead. "This isn't over," James hissed, as Marcus led him to the patrol car. "I'll be out on bail before breakfast. You can't protect her forever." I watched impassively as Marcus placed him in the back seat. Once the car door closed, I allowed myself a small smile. "No, James," I murmured to myself. "This is just beginning." After the patrol car drove away, I stood on my porch for several minutes, letting the adrenaline slowly subside. The sky was beginning to lighten with pre-dawn grey. A new day was coming, and with it, the first steps toward justice and healing for my daughter. When I went back inside, I was surprised to find Elaine standing in the hallway, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. "I heard everything," she said softly. "I was so scared he would hurt you too." I wrapped my arms gently around her. "That man will never hurt either of us again." I promised, "We're going to get through this together." As I led her back to bed, I knew the confrontation with James was only the first battle in what would likely be a prolonged war. But for the first time since finding Elaine broken on my doorstep, I felt certain of victory. The following weeks thrust us into the complicated and often frustrating legal system. As predicted, James was released on bail the next morning, though the judge did uphold the temporary restraining order, prohibiting him from contacting Elaine or coming within 500 feet of her or my home. I had no illusions about how seriously James would take this legal barrier. We spent that first day securing Elaine's immediate needs. With a police escort, we retrieved essential items from her house, while James was meeting with his attorney. The beautiful home she had once been so proud of now felt like a crime scene to her. She moved through the rooms quickly, mechanically gathering clothes, medication, and important documents. "I never want to come back here," she whispered as we left. The harassment began almost immediately. not directly from James, as that would violate the restraining order, but from his family and associates. His mother called repeatedly, leaving voicemails alternating between pleading for Elaine to fix this misunderstanding and threatening legal consequences for false accusations. James's business partner approached Elaine in a grocery store, loudly suggesting she was mentally unstable and making up stories for attention. Each incident was carefully documented and reported, adding to the growing case file. Marcus assigned Detective Lisa Ramirez to handle Elaine's case, a compassionate but tenacious officer I had mentored years earlier. Lisa took Elaine's statement with sensitivity and thoroughness, helping her articulate the pattern of abuse that had preceded the final violent incident. Through Lisa's investigation, we discovered something that sent chills through me. James had a history of violence that had been carefully buried. 2 former girlfriends had filed police reports against him in other cities, only to mysteriously withdraw their complaints. Lisa tracked down one of these women, who reluctantly admitted that James had paid her a substantial settlement in exchange for her silence. The district attorney assigned to our case, Thomas Alvarez, was encouraged by this discovery. "It establishes a pattern of behavior," he explained during our first meeting. "Makes it harder for the defense to argue this was an isolated incident or accident." I was grateful for Alvarez's commitment, but realistic about the challenges ahead. James had retained Martin Reynolds, one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the state. Reynolds specialized in getting wealthy clients out of legal troubles, using every procedural tactic to delay, distract, and discredit. Sure enough, Reynolds's first move was to challenge the restraining order, claiming it was based on emotional and exaggerated allegations without physical evidence. Despite the photographic documentation of Elaine's injuries, Reynolds argued there was no proof James had caused them. The judge fortunately disagreed and maintained the order, but it was clear Reynolds was just getting started. His next strategy was attempting to intimidate Elaine into dropping the charges. A week after James's arrest, Elaine received a certified letter from Reynolds detailing all the ways a criminal trial would damage her reputation and privacy. The letter implied that James's defense would involve exposing Elaine's mental health issues and history of emotional instability. It was a clear threat to publicly humiliate her if she proceeded. Elaine was shaken but resolute. "He thinks he can still control me through fear," she said, handing me the letter. "But I'm more afraid of what happens if I let him get away with this." I immediately contacted Marcus, who brought the letter to Alvarez. The DA was furious viewing the letter as witness intimidation. He filed a complaint with the State Bar Association and requested a hearing to revoke James's bail for attempting to interfere with a witness. Unfortunately, Reynolds was too clever to have crossed any clear legal lines. The judge denied the bail revocation, but issued a stern warning against any further communication with Elaine. It wasn't the outcome we had hoped for, but it showed James and Reynolds that we were prepared to fight back against every maneuver. While navigating the legal process, we also discovered the extent of James's financial control over Elaine. He had frozen their joint accounts immediately after his arrest, leaving Elaine without access to funds. The luxury car she drove was in his name and had been repossessed from my driveway while we were meeting with the DA. Even her credit cards had been cancelled. This financial abuse was another control tactic intended to force Elaine back into dependence on James. Instead, it strengthened her resolve to become self-sufficient again. She moved into my spare bedroom, started therapy through a program for domestic violence survivors, and began rebuilding her professional network to find employment. I used my police connections to ensure the case wasn't dismissed or reduced to a minor offense, as often happened with first-time domestic violence charges. I spoke with former colleagues explaining the severity of the situation without compromising the investigation. I made sure the responding officers' reports were detailed and accurate. I attended every hearing, sitting directly behind Alvarez. My presence a silent reminder of the law enforcement community's interest in the case. Through my years on the force, I had also developed relationships with domestic violence advocacy groups. I reached out to the Survivors Justice Coalition, who provided Elaine with both emotional support and practical resources, including connecting her with a pro bono attorney for the civil aspects of her case. As the preliminary hearing approached, Elaine's anxiety intensified. She had nightmares about facing James in court, about not being believed about him, somehow escaping consequences yet again. Her therapist worked with her on coping strategies, while I focused on practical preparation, helping her rehearse her testimony and familiarizing her with courtroom procedures. "What if I fall apart on the stand?" she asked the night before the hearing. "What if I can't get the words out?" I took her hands in mine. "Then you take a deep breath, ask for a moment to compose yourself, and continue when you're ready. The truth doesn't have to be perfect, Elaine. It just has to be told." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for exactly 1 month after that terrible night when Elaine appeared on my doorstep. We had come so far in those 4 weeks, yet the hardest part of our journey was still ahead. Elaine would have to face her abuser in open court, recount the trauma in excruciating detail, and withstand attempts to discredit her testimony. As we prepared for this next challenge, I reminded her daily of something I had learned in my years of police work. Justice often moves slowly, but with persistence and courage, it does eventually arrive. The first day in court was every bit as intimidating as Elaine had feared. The county courthouse was an imposing structure of marble and granite, its high ceilings and formal atmosphere designed to inspire respect for the law, but often having the effect of intimidating those unfamiliar with its processes. Elaine gripped my hand tightly as we climbed the steps. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a conservative navy blue dress that conveyed seriousness without hiding the still visible bruises on her arms. She had debated whether to cover the fading bruises with makeup, but ultimately decided against it. "I want the judge to see what he did to me," she had said that morning. Inside, we met with Alvarez for a final preparation session. The district attorney was confident but cautious. "Reynolds will try to portray James as a respectable businessman who had one bad night," he warned, "and he'll try to paint you, Elaine, as emotional and unreliable. Remember, stick to the facts. Don't let him provoke you into an outburst." Elaine nodded, her jaw set with determination, despite the fear in her eyes. As we waited for the proceedings to begin, the courtroom began to fill. James arrived with his defense team, looking impeccable in an expensive suit, his expression appropriately somber. He avoided looking at us directly, maintaining the charade of the wrongfully accused. Just as the bailiff announced the judge's imminent arrival, the courtroom door opened and a young woman entered, hesitating at the threshold. She was in her mid-20s with auburn hair and a nervous expression. I didn't recognize her, but Elaine clearly did. Her hand tightened on mine. "That's Bethany," she whispered. "James's assistant, the one he was having an affair with." I watched as Bethany's eyes scanned the room, landing first on James, who stiffened visibly, then on us. After a moment of apparent indecision, she began walking toward our side of the courtroom. James half rose from his seat, but his attorney grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. Bethany approached us cautiously. "Elaine," she said quietly, "can I speak with you for a moment before things start?" Alvarez moved protectively closer. "Any communication should go through counsel," he began, but Elaine raised her hand. "It's okay," she said. "I want to hear what she has to say." Bethany glanced nervously over her shoulder at James, who was now openly glaring at her. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "For everything. I ended it with him weeks ago, but he kept pursuing me, threatening me when I refused to see him. That night when he came to you, he had been at my apartment trying to force his way in." Elaine's expression remained neutral, but I could sense the complex emotions churning beneath the surface. "There's more," Bethany continued, her words coming faster now. He hurt me too, not as badly as you, but she pulled up her sleeve, revealing finger-shaped bruises similar to those I had documented on Elaine. This was 2 weeks ago when I told him it was over for good. I was too scared to report it, but when I saw the news about your case, she took a deep breath. I want to testify against him, if that would help. The shock on James's face was visible even from across the room. His attorney was now frantically writing notes, clearly blindsided by this development. Alvarez stepped in, professionally composed, but unable to entirely hide his satisfaction at this unexpected turn. Ms. Bethany Morales, she supplied. Ms. Morales, if you're willing to provide a statement, we should speak privately. Would you mind stepping outside with me for a moment? As Alvarez escorted Bethany out the courtroom was a buzz with whispers. James and Reynolds were engaged in intense conversation. James's facade of calm completely shattered. Did you know, Elaine asked me, her voice trembling slightly, that she would come forward? I shook my head. No, but I'm not surprised. Abusers rarely have just one victim. I squeezed her hand. You're not alone in this, Elaine. And your courage may have given others the strength to speak up too. The judge entered and the preliminary hearing began. What had initially been expected to be a straightforward proceeding, with James pleading not guilty, quickly transformed when Alvarez requested a brief recess to incorporate new evidence and witness testimony. The judge granted it, scheduling a continuation for the following day. Outside the courtroom, Alvarez was almost giddy as he explained the implications. Bethany has provided a detailed statement about James's pattern of controlling and violent behavior. She also mentioned other women who might come forward. Reynolds has already approached me about discussing plea options. Elaine looked stunned. He wants to plead guilty, just like that. He wants to avoid a trial that could expose even more of his behavior, Alvarez explained. But I've made it clear we're not interested in a slap on the wrist. Any plea deal would need to include significant jail time, mandatory treatment, and full financial restitution. Over the next 2 days, 3 more women came forward with stories of James's abuse. 2 former girlfriends, and most surprisingly his company's former human resources director, who revealed she had been fired after documenting complaints of sexual harassment against James. With each new revelation, Reynolds' strategy shifted from aggressive defense to damage control. By the end of the week, he had negotiated a plea agreement that included 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, completion of a batterer intervention program, and substantial financial restitution to Elaine. The judge accepted the plea, but added his own conditions. James would be required to wear an ankle monitor for 3 years after his release, and any violation of the permanent restraining order would result in his immediate return to prison to serve the remainder of a 5-year suspended sentence. As we left the courthouse after the sentencing, Elaine was quiet, processing the rapid turn of events. The media had picked up the story, focusing on James's fall from respected businessman to convicted abuser. Reporters approached us for statements, but Elaine declined to speak publicly, not yet ready to become the face of domestic violence survival. "Is it really over?" she asked as we drove home. Just like that, I understood her disbelief. After months of living in fear of fighting for justice through a system that often failed victims, the relatively swift resolution seemed almost anticlimactic. "The legal part is mostly over," I said carefully. "But healing takes longer, and rebuilding your life will be a process. You don't have to figure it all out today." She nodded, looking out the window at the city passing by. I keep thinking about Bethany and those other women. How different things might have been if we had all known about each other sooner. Her words highlighted something I had observed throughout my career, how isolation enables abuse to continue. Abusers worked hard to keep their victims separated, to make each woman feel she was alone in her experience. "That's why speaking up matters so much," I told her. "Even when it's terrifying, You never know who else might find their voice because of yours. As we pulled into my driveway, I saw Elaine smile for the first time in what felt like ages. It was small and tentative, but real. I couldn't have done this without you, Mom. I reached over and squeezed her hand. You're stronger than you know, Elaine. All I did was remind you of that strength when you needed it most. The trial and its resolution weren't the end of our story, but they were a crucial turning point. Justice had been served imperfectly, perhaps, but definitively. Now the work of healing could truly begin. 6 months after James began serving his sentence, Elaine and I sat on my back porch, enjoying a rare moment of peaceful reflection. Spring had arrived, bringing new growth to my small garden, and metaphorically to our lives as well. Elaine looked healthier than she had in years. The physical bruises had long since faded, and the emotional ones, while still present, were gradually healing. I enrolled for fall classes today, she announced, a quiet pride in her voice, to finish my MBA, the one James convinced me to put on hold. I smiled, delighted by this concrete sign of her renewed independence. That's wonderful, Elaine. The business world better watch out. In the months since the trial, Elaine had made remarkable progress in reclaiming her life. She had moved from my spare bedroom to her own apartment, a modest but cheerful place near the community college where I worked security. She had found a job as a marketing coordinator for a local nonprofit, a position that utilized her skills while accommodating her need for a less pressured environment as she recovered. Most importantly, she had committed fully to her therapy, attending both individual sessions and a support group for survivors of domestic violence. Initially reluctant to share her story with strangers, she had gradually found her voice in the group, drawing strength from others' experiences, and eventually offering guidance to newer members. Dr. Levine says I'm making excellent progress, she shared, referring to her therapist. She thinks I might be ready to lead some discussion groups soon. The transformation I had witnessed in my daughter over these months filled me with profound gratitude. From the broken woman who had collapsed on my doorstep to this increasingly confident survivor, rebuilding her life on her own terms, Elaine's journey inspired me daily. My own life had changed significantly as well. The crisis with Elaine had reawakened my passion for supporting domestic violence survivors, a cause I had championed during my police career. I had started volunteering with the Survivors Justice Coalition, the organization that had supported Elaine during the trial. Initially, I offered practical assistance, helping women navigate the often confusing legal system and accompanying them to court proceedings. But the coalition director soon recognized the unique perspective I brought as both a former police officer and the mother of a survivor. She invited me to develop a training program for law enforcement agencies, teaching officers how to more effectively respond to domestic violence calls. The program had been piloted in 3 precincts so far, with promising results. Officers reported feeling better equipped to identify signs of ongoing abuse, document evidence properly, and connect victims with appropriate resources. I found deep satisfaction in this work, using my experience to potentially save others from the suffering Elaine had endured. I spoke with Bethany yesterday. Elaine mentioned bringing my thoughts back to the present. She's doing well, started her own business as a virtual assistant. She said to thank you again for connecting her with the coalition. After the trial, Bethany had reached out to Elaine, hesitant, but determined to make amends for her unwitting role in the situation. The 2 women had developed an unlikely friendship, bonded by their shared experience of James's manipulation and abuse. I had worried initially that the relationship might keep Elaine tethered to painful memories, but it had proven to be healing for both women. "And how about you?" I asked gently. "Lauren mentioned she invited you to dinner again." Lauren was the sister of one of Elaine's support group members, a kind and patient man who had expressed interest in getting to know Elaine better. Her initial response had been immediate rejection, unwilling to consider any romantic involvement after her traumatic marriage. Elaine smiled shyly. I said yes this time. Just dinner, nothing serious. But Dr. Levine thinks it might be good for me to practice normal social interaction with men in a safe context. I nodded, careful not to show too much enthusiasm and potentially pressure her. That sounds like a sensible approach, and Lauren will be there too. For the first part, yes, kind of like training wheels. She laughed softly at her own analogy. I'm not ready for a relationship. I might not be for a long time, but I don't want to be afraid forever either. This was perhaps the most significant sign of healing, the willingness to move cautiously toward a future not defined entirely by past trauma. Elaine was reclaiming not just her independence, but her hope. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, I reflected on the lessons this difficult journey had taught us both. For me, it had reinforced something I had observed countless times during my police career, that justice, while imperfect, was worth fighting for, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. That systems could work when people within them were committed to doing what was right, rather than what was easy. For Elaine, the lessons were more personal and profound. She had learned the difference between genuine love and controlling possession. She had discovered her own strength, a resilience that had survived James's attempts to crush it. Perhaps most importantly, she had learned that asking for help was not weakness, but courage. You know what I realized recently, Mom? Elaine said, breaking our comfortable silence. That night when I came to your door, I thought my life was ending. I couldn't imagine ever feeling normal again, ever being happy. But now I can see it was actually a beginning, the start of becoming who I was always meant to be. I reached over and took her hand throat tight with emotion. I'm so proud of you, Elaine, not just for surviving, but for how you've chosen to heal and grow. As darkness fell, we moved inside, and Elaine helped me prepare a simple dinner. The easy domesticity of the moment struck me as miraculous, considering where we had been 6 months earlier. There would be more challenges ahead, certainly. Recovery was rarely a straight line forward. But watching my daughter move confidently around my kitchen, laughing, as she recounted an anecdote from work, I knew with certainty that the darkest days were behind us. Later that evening, as Elaine prepared to drive back to her apartment, she hugged me tightly. Thank you for being my safe harbor, she whispered. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Always, I promised. That's what family is supposed to be. Not possession, not control. Just unconditional love and support. As I watched her car pull away, I thought about all the women still trapped in situations like the one Elaine had escaped. Women who perhaps didn't have someone to turn to in their darkest hour. My work with the Coalition and police training program felt more urgent than ever. If my experience could help even one more person find safety and justice, then something meaningful would have come from our pain. The uniform I had put on that night was more than just fabric and insignia. It represented a commitment to protection and justice that transcended any official role. It was a commitment I would continue to honor not just for Elaine, but for all those still waiting for their own moment of liberation. Have you ever stood up for someone you love when no one else would? How did you find the courage to be their protector? Please share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, I would be grateful if you would hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true stories of resilience and justice. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message of hope after trauma, please share this video with them. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help or offer it when it's needed most. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the strength to protect those you love.